On today's World Insight, rising tensions in the Middle East. What will it take to pull back from the worst? How imminent is a new round of conflict? And what will it take for a compromise toward peace?
There will definitely be a retaliation, and it will be a punishing retaliation.
What happened in Tehran that's been attributed to Israel was very embarrassing for the leadership of the Islamic Republic.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The United States has stepped up diplomacy, urging other countries to tell Iran that escalation in the Middle East is not in anyone's interest. That is, according to the U.S. media. The moves come amid fear that Iran is preparing a retaliation strike against Israel. The U.S. President Joe Biden called King Abdullah II of Jordan and convened his national security team. Last month, a top Hamas leader was assassinated while he was traveling in Iran. That further escalated tension in the Middle East on top of the war in Gaza. Special Envoy Jai Jun of the Chinese government on Middle East issue also met recently and called his counterparts in the region trying to cool down the regional tension. As fears grow of a wider Middle East conflict, how could the rest of the world help put the region from the brink? Let's ask our panelists. The first, a panelist from Israel. Joining us first in Tel Aviv, Dr. Meir Gavan-Denfar, Middle East analyst. Dr. Gavan-Denfar, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
How would you articulate Israel's reluctance to admit yes or no to the killing of the Hamas leader, whether that is an action taken by Israel?
This is a policy that Israel usually follows in such operations that are attributed to it. There was, for example, in 2007, there was a bombing of the Syrian nuclear reactor that also Israel did not take responsibility for, though all the foreign media reports attributed to Israel. The reason is because in order to, this is an action taken in order to reduce the chances of retaliation by the other side, because it is believed that in the Middle East, if you carry out an operation and then you admit to it and then you celebrate it, then it makes the situation much worse. So once you undertake such an operation, in order to bring down the flames afterwards, it's best not to take responsibility for it, even though the entire international community, the press, says that you're responsible for it. This is basically the approach.
So you're saying this could be done by Israel?
It could be done, yes, absolutely, yes.
As far as I understand, the killing of Hezbollah leaders, that has already been claimed the responsibility by Israel, right? Why the difference?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes.
Why the difference?
Yes, there's a big difference here because with Iran, it's a much more serious conflict with Iran at the moment, and what happened in Tehran that's been attributed to Israel was very embarrassing for the leadership of the Islamic Republic. So in order not to embarrass them even more, this is one of the main reasons why Israel does not take responsibility. They were being welcomed. The leader, Mr. Haniyeh, was being welcomed like a rock star in Tehran. And he was being promised openly by Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei that he's going to get more help and Iran will stand by him. So Haniyeh was an enemy of Israel. And of course, the Islamic Republic stood by him proudly. And so I think it's natural for Israel to want to contain such a threat. But afterwards, again, to reduce the flames, Israel prefers not to take responsibility.
At this point, we all are looking at the timing. This is also the time when the new president of Iran came to the office. So, which puts your earlier explanation of so-called not embarrassing Iran seem to be with a huge question mark?
Well, Mr. Pezeshkian, before entering the office, presidential office, he, on the one hand, he promised that he wants to open up Iran's economy to other countries, and he wants to improve relations with the West. And at the same time, he praised Hamas, who's carried out this terrible atrocity and this war. And Hamas is also an anti-Semitic organization. I'm not saying that Israel has never done anything wrong. I'm not saying that at all. We have also made mistakes. We are aware of that.
Dr. Grandanfar, as we know, the Hamas leader, before he was being killed, actually traveled in the Middle East. And he also has been having quite some space of living together with his family in different parts of the Middle East as well. So the choice of the location in which he is being killed is particularly open up a Pandora's box to everybody in terms of the potential of the conflicts in the Middle East. Dr. Grandanfar, at this moment, when there's warning coming from the United States, Israel's ally, about a possible attack against Israel by Iran, so how are you preparing for any possible attack? As far as you know, I know you are not a military personnel, but according to the public information and usually the earlier practices.
Of course. The state of Israel, we have a home front, and we have, which is the civilian part of the IDF. It's telling Israelis, we have bomb shelters. Everybody has the bomb shelters ready, open. The IDF is on high alert. Meanwhile, people get on with their lives. We know we are about to be attacked by missiles and drones. I think all the systems are ready. I don't believe that anything is hermetical. You can't seal off everything. It's quite possible that some of the missiles would get through. But we are ready. This is not a war we chose, but we are defending ourselves.
People in Gaza have always been saying over the past few months, this is not a conflict they have chosen. Civilians are dying.
Correct.
So are humanitarian workers. There are protests against Israel over the past months, over and over again. We are not seeing any de-escalation of tension from the Israeli side. Do you think the best preparation for any attack against Israel is to stop and de-escalate the tension in Gaza?
I would love to see, and I would love to. Believe you me, every week I go to demonstrations in Tel Aviv.
So you're going to the demonstration against the Israeli attack in Gaza? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm going against the demonstration. I'm going to demonstrations against the policies of Mr. Netanyahu.
I see.
Why?
And
it's very important, I think, to reach a ceasefire, which is what we need. We need both sides. We need Hamas, and we need the state of Israel. I call upon my government in every interview, because I love my country and this is my home, and they are my compatriots who are sitting in Gaza.
Why do you think they didn't act according to your advice?
Prime Minister Netanyahu believes that the onus is on Hamas for reaching a deal. But however, there are those in Israel, including, according to the newspaper reports, according heads of the military, who believes that Mr. Netanyahu may not be interested in a deal. And this is something that we are all very concerned about. But I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens in the coming weeks. Prime Minister Netanyahu believes that the best way to release the hostages is to increase the military pressure against Hamas. And it's Hamas that is not interested, but there are those in Israel who don't agree. And unfortunately, this is the situation we find ourselves in. These are very difficult days.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meir Grandanfar.
Thank you.
You're watching World Insight. Coming up, how could the rest of the world help put the Middle East from the brink of a wider conflict in the region? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Our topic today is the escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Joining us in Beijing, Rong Ying, Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies in Paris, Joab Toker, Professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. In Tehran, Iran, Professor Mohammad Marandi, Professor at the Tehran University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. First of all, I want to go directly to Professor Marandi now. There was warning coming from Washington about the so-called imminent attack by Iran against Israel. How much can you confirm about the so-called imminency and also the possible attacks?
There will definitely be a retaliation, and it will be a punishing retaliation. The United States and the Europeans will allow this regime to do anything, and therefore the only way to stop the regime and to force the regime to change its behavior is for a punishing response.
All right. So, Professor Marandi, when it comes to the U.S. response, it was Washington over the past hours that's been warning Israel of imminent attack by Iran. Meanwhile, you also see increasing of military presence by Washington in the Middle East, for example, through warships and others. And at the same time, Washington's allies, such as the UK, has also been claiming they are increasing their presence in the region and ready to come for support, quote unquote. So how do you see these ever-increasing complex realities in the Middle East as a result of the latest Washington warning of a so-called imminent attack by Iran against Israel?
That does not intimidate Iran, nor does it dissuade Iran from responding. Remember, just recently, the Lancet Medical Journal, which is a very old British medical journal, very well known, it published a report where it stated that until now, almost 200,000 Palestinians may have died in Gaza. 200,000. And this report was from a few weeks ago. It may be more than 200,000 now, according to the same calculations. This is what the United States is supporting. Iran is not going to be intimidated by the United States or any of its small European and weak European allies. So the United States can bring whatever troops it wants to the region.
Professor Marandi, according to some latest report on The Telegraph, which is a media organization based in the UK, it suggests that Iran has suggested recently that it's not looking to escalate the regional tension, but believe it needs to punish Israel. But as we know, punishing Israel and also with the complex interest entangles in the Middle East, it is very likely tensions will be increased. So how would Iran be able to do two things?
That is definite. There's no doubt about Iran's response to the regime. But whether the regime chooses to retaliate and to continue this, that is up to the Americans. We know that Tel Aviv cannot do anything without Western support and without American support. So if there is a counterstrike against Iran, that means that the Americans are allowing it. If the Americans want, they can, as I said, rein in the regime and it will be over. But the Iranians will definitely punish the regime.
Some of the regional players are busy going through diplomacy right now in order to de-escalate the tension. But how much hope is there, Mr. Rong?
Well, certainly we hope that the shuttle diplomacy will pay off. And we're also hoping that the two conflicting sides, despite I think their concerns, their sort of reasons for response and to respond and counter-respond, they would also take into account the danger that escalation and spillover to the region. But I only hope that the regional diplomacy, the international diplomacy will pay off.
Honestly, through the logic of analysis and just having heard our partner to this conversation in Tehran, I'm not very optimistic. I think that indeed Iranians will hit. I think that unfortunately we can take this for granted. What we cannot take for granted yet is the scale of the Iranian hit and the successful dimensions of this hit, because these might configure what will come next.
How do you read the original intention of some of the European capitals, including Paris? How much constructive role do you think France and some of the others could play?
I have no doubt that Europeans in general, the French in particular, and the Americans, they all are interested in bringing down the temperature. It is indeed what they say in communique, in official statements, but this is really what their intentions are. Yes, the French and the British and the Americans are trying to lower down the level of danger. Will they succeed? I'm afraid that they will not succeed in a very dramatic way. They may be able to limit down, to bring down some of the scale of the damages all over the place, but I don't believe they'll be able to avoid it.
What about the war in Gaza?
Including the war in Gaza, which, as we believed, and I think is part of the geostrategic reality, was in a way on its route towards some kind of, if not a solution, some kind of arrangement, which involved a ceasefire, the return of hostages, and the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons. And anyway, some dimension of calm in comparison to what we have gone through in that region over the last almost 10 months. I guess now all this is in a way sort of brought to the back of the background picture, and will not happen in the short run before the coming wave of strikes happens, and which would most probably strike, as we heard and dealt with before, with the Iranian hit and strike against Israel to punish Israel, and then the reaction of the Israelis as a result.
All right. Mr. Rong, also your thoughts. I understand that there are some different levels of Chinese diplomacy also involved at this moment. There are special envoys coming from China that are working on the issue, in fact, over the past few months. And of course, the latest situation is only going to bring those efforts facing more complexity. So your thoughts, Mr. Rong?
Yeah, certainly I think diplomacy is very much important, but diplomacy can only be effective. It is helps, delivers, particularly in terms of de-escalating or preventing the escalation of this tension. I think China's position is a good example. First and foremost, it's very much principled. Secondly, I think it's also very clearly purposed by condemning, by opposing the political violence, assassination like that. Thirdly, I think also points out way ahead, that is the immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza. As a matter of fact, it very much resonate to the positions of the regional countries, as we have seen that UAE has already expressed its opposition, its rejection of political violence and assassination, calling upon dialogue, justice, and dignity. And understand that the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, at the initiation of Iran, is going to convene emergent session next on Wednesday. And I think efforts by regional countries should be supported. And certainly I think like Jordan and others, they are working very hard. The international community, I think the diplomacy can only help if it has a purpose. And it can only help if it has a principled position.
Ms. Rong, we understand the U.S. has already increased the warships in the region in the Middle East, and meanwhile, the U.S. ally, the U.K., for example, had already had its Royal Navy ships and RAF helicopters on standby, according to some latest reports, mainly coming from the West. So your assessment of the latest situation strategically, even in the military terms, we understand there are complex geopolitics going on all over the world, including in the Middle East, between some of the biggest players of the world. So your assessment of what this could mean from China's perspective about the region and the future dangers of the region?
I think the military deployment or preparedness by the United States and its allies in the region is not going to help. Rather, it has been counterproductive. I understand that their argument is that this is, on the one hand, it meant to so-called fulfill its responsibilities to defend Israel. But I would also call upon the United States and the allies to fulfill its duty as the international a member of UN Security Council and member of international community for justice, for peace, and also for de-escalation. So the United States, by sending and increasing its military deployment in the region, in the meantime, I think calling upon de-escalation is just contradictory. It just undermines effort of international community for diplomacy. I think if the United States really want diplomacy to deliver, to make it effective, it has to become out a very clear signal. And I'm very much worried because it appears very clearly this sort of round is going to be different from what we had in April. And I think my colleague, our co-panelist, Professor Marandi, made it very clear. And in other words, we may going to have a totally different dynamic. So responses, counter-responses, and responses, we're going to have a very dangerous situation, a risky situation of vicious cycle, which would pull in the region into a conflict. That goes against everybody's interest, like Secretary Clinton said in his sort of communication with the members of the G7.
Finally, before we go, I want to also have your thoughts about what could be your thoughts on articulating the best approach by, for example, your country, France, in these escalations of tensions.
Well, unfortunately, I am worried about the escalation of violence, and I am worried about the attacks and counterattacks and counterattacks. This seems to be close to reality, and it is worrisome. Point. Having said that, and having said some of the other things we had earlier in the conversation, it's not only important that third parties will participate in diplomatic efforts to calm the temperature down and try to convince leaders on all parts to do things perhaps in a way which would not be as blunt as they would have planned it to be. But other partners, and these could be the Germans, it could be the French, it could be the Americans, it could be the Jordanians, the Chinese, the Egyptians, to try to convince the direct protagonists. Right now, these are mainly the Israelis and the Iranians, that they really have interests in calming down the fire, right? It's not just because in the sake of purity and beautiful principles in international relations, in terms of principles. And in this case, this is where diplomacy can enter into action and hope to have some efficiency. How many chances of that do we see right now? Very little, but not none.
How do you see the persuasions coming from the other two gentlemen? And how do you think your country, Iran, will be able to avoid the escalation of tensions and vicious cycle?
Well, I agree with your guess in China, but your guess in France, I think, is completely inaccurate. France, the UK, Berlin, the United States, these are not third parties. These are with Israelis. Whereas when Iran and the Saudis wanted to resolve their problems, even though Iran had many grievances, the Saudis were angry as well. The Chinese came in as a third party to solve the problem. So, and that is why we have relations now between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But as long as the West supports ethno-supremacism, as long as they support apartheid, as long as they facilitate genocide, the world can no longer see them as a party to diplomacy and as being sincere in bringing about justice and world peace.
Professor Mohammad Marandi, based in Tehran, Professor Joab Tolker, based in Paris, and Mr. Rong Ying, based in Beijing. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. By the way, I want to state very clearly, all of the opinions expressed here by our panelists are opinions of their own, not necessarily representing any editorial policy or values coming from CGTN, which this program is being broadcast on. But thank you so much for all your input. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.